this is geared towards is making sure that you are increasing the likelihood of survival of your offspring who are genetically healthy. You know, now that relationship between sex and having children has broken down, obviously we live in a different world, a bit like gluttony. You know, we live in a world of high fat, high sugar sex rather than food.
And I think it's still society's trying to work out where it is at any particular point. Mm-hmm. You know, are we outraged by full frontal nudity in the House of Guinness, which seems to have got an enormous amount of coverage?
I missed that one.
Yeah, but it is the idea. We're still, oh my God, can you show that on television or whatever? We still, there's still a huge amount of judgment around sex as well.
I mean, you know, just to if you think about how much things have changed in our own lifetimes. I mean, I grew up in the era of Mary Whitehouse, and you know, Frankie Goes to Hollywood not being allowed on the BBC. Yeah. We live in an extremely different world now, and our biology is far from catching up with that. In fact, you know, it's interesting that one of the theories around sex addiction, which there are arguments as to whether or not it's truly an addiction, but you know, if we use that term loosely, there are very strong parallels with medical conditions. So, you know, one of the things that I routinely see in my clinics are individuals who have got Parkinson's disease, who have been given a group of drugs that simulate dopamine. And dopamine is very important for regulating our brain's reward system. And you know, we've known for about 50 years now that when you give people intermittent high doses of dopamine mimicking drugs, then they often develop impulse control disorders. They often develop changes in their sexual behavior, usually, you know, hypersexuality, or, you know, spending a great deal of time online, looking at porn, or occasionally even what we term paraphilias, or non-normative sexual behaviors that come out of the blue without any preceding history of any of this. And so in these cases, what we think is happening is that by periodically very strongly stimulating the circuits, the reward circuits within the brain, you cause fundamental changes to how that brain circuitry works, and you encourage people to seek out new rewards in whether it be in a sexual way or a food way, or a number of different aspects. If you look at sex addiction, so one of the arguments as to what the underlying causes of sex addiction is that our brains are not designed to live in a world whereby sexually erotic or sexual experience in its various forms is so widely available. And by making it widely available, you are essentially doing something similar, which is that you're hyperstimulating this brain circuitry. To such an extent now, there was a sort of interesting study that looked at Christian clergy and found that some 16% of Christian clergy meet the criteria for cybersex addiction. So you know, if you are sitting within a vicarage, you are not immune to exposure to these kinds of stimuli.
So we have 10 minutes. So it's fascinating, right? Okay, this is the interesting moderator's dilemma. So we had a brilliant session on sleep before. People happily put their hands up saying that they've had an issue with sleep. 7 deadly sins. Are people going to be going, I'm feeling exceptionally lustful today, can you help me with this? So wanted to just throw it open to the audience. Thoughts, observations, questions, because there's a huge amount. By the way, the book's outside. We've got one of the booksellers outside, and Guy's kindly agreed to sign it and have chats outside after the session. So, go on. Who's going to be brave enough to ask the first question? Or I'll pick on people. Oh, yeah, lady in front.
I'm not quite sure how to verbalise it, but the thing that comes to mind is actually belief. You know, how do beliefs get educated into us, or do we get born with beliefs? Are they societal? And how does that impact all of this?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So look, I think our beliefs to some extent are influenced by our biology, because we know what is what is good for us, we know what is good for society, and that gets encodified in religious beliefs. I have to hold my hands up. I'm a complete atheist, and I came into writing this book thinking, this is just religious nonsense. But actually, in codifying a series of rules or guidelines for how we behave, undoubtedly will then have an impact on our behaviours. Because if as I said a couple of times now, the brain responds to reward and punishment, and if and that reward or punishment can come in terms of heaven and hell. It can come in terms of you're a good upstanding citizen or you're in prison, in a variety of different forms. That these sort of religious edicts, I think, do have a fundamental influence on societal behaviour, and therefore have knock-on consequences in terms of modifying how our brains are working. So there's a bit of a vicious cycle between our biology, our beliefs, and then our biology again.
It's interesting because in an increasingly secular world, in the West at least,
yeah.
the role of traditional religions is becoming less. But our ability to judge in society, have views, whether it's the Daily Mail
yeah.
or whatever,
yeah.
is still, there are still norms
yes.
applied to society. And they evolve,
yeah.
but it's not just a religious construct.
No, absolutely. And I think we need to think long and hard as to how we define what the correct way to behave is. I think at the moment we're very far away from that.
Yeah, I mean, led by some of our leaders in the world. But interestingly, again, what we hold up, it's the variations with sex scandals in Britain are taken as a norm in France.
Yeah.
The latitude that we have in different societies, even
well,
though
they're also taken as a norm in different political parties. So
yes, that's true.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, good. We're now starting to see that. Yes. So we'll just go.
Okay. Thank you. I've learned today what's wrong with my neighbour. He's got Brenner syndrome. I was wondering, because through the 20th century, we spent a lot of time kind of putting academics and academia and medicine and all of these sort of areas of thought and expertise into various lumps, and we've distinguished them very carefully. But you're talking about breaking down some of those barriers, for instance, between psychiatry and neuroscience. And do you think that's going to carry on? And is it going to be sort of given more weight within the NHS?
I think those are two separate issues. I think that, yes, it will undoubtedly carry on. If you look at all areas of medicine, for example, in gastroenterology, there is an increasing understanding between the mind and the gut. In neurology, I think that there is an increasing shift to, we often see patients in our clinics who, for example, are paralysed or have seizures, not as a result of any clear structural abnormality with their brains, but because that this is a manifestation of psychological distress. But we're now beginning to understand that actually, if you look at these individuals, there are clear differences in how their nervous system functions. So it's not that they've got a brain tumour or anything else, but actually there are some differences in how their brain functions. And I think that those boundaries are going to break down across many areas of medicine. The question about the NHS is entirely separate, which is the NHS is Hugh and I were talking about this as we were coming in, and every conversation I have with every colleague is always, are you surviving? How's your service doing? We are in pretty dire straits in the NHS, and obviously, understanding this complexity is only going to increase costs. So I think that is we're going to have to wait and see.
Brilliant. Thanks. Nikki?
I was wondering whether these sins kind of cluster a bit. So let's say if you have more of a sloth personality, does that come with gluttony then? Or can those things vary completely?
Well, I think there are certain sins that do cluster. So, for example, if you look at pride and if you look at envy, those often cluster, and we see that, for example, in people who are narcissistic. So, narcissistic personality disorder is often very, obviously by its nature, is associated with pride, so an elevated view of oneself and one's importance. But bizarrely, actually, narcissistic personality disorder is also very strongly associated with envy, because one of the things that some narcissists, the key aspect of narcissism is that you have a view of yourself that would be challenged by other people's views of you. And so, for people who exhibit a type of narcissism called vulnerable narcissism, that they are very, very fragile when it comes to any information that runs contrary to their own view of themselves, and actually envy comes hand in hand with that. Sloth, does it come alongside gluttony? I don't think so, despite the popular, what's in the popular imagination, because we think of, the boy from Pickwick's Papers, for example, Sleepy Joe, who had obstructive sleep apnea. I don't know if you talked about obstructive sleep apnea, Hugh. And so obviously there is a overt overlap between sleep and fatigue, but they're actually two very distinct manifestations. So in answer to your question, kind of, yes.
Brilliant. Last question here.
This lady's question about beliefs then prompted me to think the role that education can have in changing these sinful characteristics.
Yeah, so I would view education as being part of the process of exposing our young children and young adults to what is deemed as being acceptable within our society, and that will, of course, fundamentally change people's views and behaviours. Equally, the other role of education, I guess, is to understand what is normal in your home environment as well. And I think that for a lot of teachers, one of the areas that they spend a great deal of time on is the welfare of the children that they're teaching. So making sure that their home environment is appropriate to bringing up individuals into full-formed, well-formed adults.
Well, we've hit the midday. Guy, that was just fascinating. Really, really insightful, and actually has just generated thousands more questions. I mean, the nice bit about this is you go, and. Really recommend the book. You get a chance straight outside to do it. But before you do, round of applause for our great guest.